Continuing my rebuild of the Z8081 game Caverns, never released on the ZX81. In the last video I got most of the menu screens working. I had missed the practice screen, so I now added this in. Next I split the loop for the menu screen and the game loop into two separate loops. Only certain key inputs are required in each menu. The keys in the menu loop requiring key off before a next press rather than responding to continual key presses like in the game loop. I'd now created a global variables assembly file and started working on the game settings assembly file. So in the global variables, I had the current key that was being pressed, I had the last key that was being pressed. This was to check that the key had been released before you responded to the next key. I had a variable for the number of dwarfs that would be shown. I had a variable for the speed that the game would play at. I had a variable for the number of players, either one player or two player, and a variable for the current screen. In the game setting.asm file, I had routines to increment the speed, to increment the players, and to increment the dwarfs. So these operated on the menu screen. So if you now press the D key, the number of dwarfs cycled between 1 to 6. If you press the A key, which is the speed that the game runs at, the numbers cycle from 3 through to 6 and back to 1. If you press the L key, the players swap between 1 player and 2 player. Some of the problems I've had in this session were using relative jumps rather than normal jumps. So I took out most of the relative jumps and just using JP now. I kept leaving commas out of instructions which the assembler didn't flag up. So for instance, call Z and then the location wasn't working properly. It wasn't obvious why. The problems I was having needed the debugger to sort out. It was proving more and more useful. Making sure when using a call procedure that I returned correctly and laying out the code so it was obvious how the call was being returned, and making sure that things that I would need to use later, registers I'd need to use later on, were pushed before calling another procedure and then popped afterwards to get the values back that you needed. One of the things that I need to look at is the casing on labels. So in some places I've used all caps. On other files I've used Pascal case. Here I've used camo case. Here I've used something else. All a bit of a mess. I need to sort that out. When I originally wrote the game, I wrote assembly instructions in a notepad and converted them to hex in the notepad and then poked them into rem statements using a hex loader. I didn't have an assembler or a debugger. With the assembler and the debugger, things are moving much more quickly now, and I can make bigger changes to the code without having to move the code around within rem statements, which was always a pain. So now it's time to move on to the first bit of animation. This prop was to drop the blocks, which are inverse character X characters. So for example, on this intro screen, you've got a lot of these inverse X characters. If there's a space underneath them, they need to drop down. For this to work, I needed a representation of the screen in memory. With the ZX81, the screen is held in RAM, which is done by the ZX81's code. But don't have this on the Spectrum, as the display is held differently as high res. So I needed a 24 by 32 block of memory to store this information. So in the binaries, I created a label screen with space for the 24 by 32 characters, which I could, when saving to the screen, I could poke in a character into this, and when I wanted to read from the screen, I could read back out of it. So in my print.asm file, I added get ZX81 car, which gets the character from the screen object, passing in B as the X position, C as the Y position, returning the ZX81 character in the A register, and then save ZX81 car, which again you passed in the X position in B, the Y position in C, and the character that you wanted to save to the screen object in A. So now I was able to run practice screen 2, and you can see that the block is dropping down in the middle of the screen. The first bit of animation I've done on this rewrite. So the menu loop, going back to what I was saying earlier, I've stripped this down a little bit, and this is the main loop, and it gets the character from the keyboard. It checks that the key being pressed is not the same as the last key, to make sure that the same key isn't being pressed twice or more. And it then calls the check menu keyboard routine to decide what to do with it. If you press X, then it ends the game. Then in the game loop, this is quite simple at the moment. Again, calls the keyboard, checks to see if anything's being pressed. If nothing's being pressed, then go to complete the game loop. If something is being pressed, then decide what to do with it in check keyboard. I don't have anything in there at the moment. If the T character is being pressed, then exit the game. When you're completing the game loop, first of all it calls the drop blocks proc to make the inverse X blocks drop. It then calls the delay. So at the moment I've done a very simple delay, which just counts, which loads a value into the BC register and counts down. This will check the speed of the game from the menu parameters and vary the speed of the game. You can do delays by counting the time the computer's been switched on, or if you've got a clock, as some of the Spectrum Next have, you can check that. But for now, I'm just using this very simple method. So now I've got some simple animation started. Feel like I'm getting into the game. And in the next episode, I'll look at probably getting the lifts working. But that's for another day.